Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the Roadmaster Battery Disconnect on a 2025 Buick Encore GX. When flat towing vehicles, some of them have special requirements, and a lot of that comes down to either pulling fuses or disconnecting the battery, whether it be for the braking system or draws on the electrical system. And this vehicle does require a battery disconnect, and there's a few ways you can do that. You can unplug the battery each time you want to flat tow and then reconnect it when you're ready to drive. You can get manual switches, which just simply at the turn of a knob will cut that power, and normally you mount those in the engine bay. Today we have a solenoid based system which is mounted right here, and it taps into the battery and basically creates a disconnect between the two. So we separate it, and that way, from a push of a button installed on the inside of the vehicle, you can disconnect the battery nice and easy with really no work or having to hop in the engine bay at all. Now clearly you can hear the dinging, the door is open. I have it in an accessory mode, and as I mentioned before, normally you'd have to unhook that battery. Well, I was able to mount this switch right here on this panel. Quick push of the button, that cuts the power, no problem. And just to connect it back up, just like that, and you're ready to go. So as far as installation, this one is not that hard to do. You are going to have to modify the plastic cover on the battery and run the wire inside to be able to mount this switch up, and you can really pick any place you want. I found that this is always a good spot because it's just a small panel, it's out of the way, and it looks clean when it's done. So if you're looking to get a Encore GX down the road flat towed without having to hop in the hood each time to disconnect the battery, this is definitely the way that I'd recommend to do it. There's going to be 5 main components that are going to be required at minimum to flat tow any vehicle, and the Buick's not going to be any different, except you are going to need a battery disconnect, or you're going to have to manually pull the battery cable off each time you flat tow. And we installed a Roadmaster Battery Disconnect on ours today, and it's a great way to do it. But as far as the 5 main minimum components, the first thing we'll have is the base plate, and that's going to attach to the frame of the vehicle and become the structural mounting point for all of our connections, but also allow us to be able to tow it down the road by attaching to our tow bar. And the tow bar is going to be the connection point between the base plate and the hitch on the RV. And just like towing a trailer, you have your safety cables that'll go onto the loops on the base plate, and that way in case of any disconnect, you're going to have those cables still holding on to the vehicle. We also have diode wiring, which is going to be cables that run to the taillight on the Encore, and that way when you're running your running lights, your turn signals, and brake lights, they're going to illuminate on the taillights of your towed vehicle, keeping you safe and legal. Many braking systems will also require tapping into diode wiring, so it's definitely worth picking up. Speaking of braking systems, we have a Blue Ox Patriot today, but all braking systems are going to have a breakaway cable, and this is in case of a catastrophic disconnect. This cable is going to pull and apply the brakes on the vehicle, bringing it to a stop so it's not rolling down the highway. And I'm going to walk you through all the steps to make sure that you get it installed on your Buick. So let's take a look at that. Get our battery disconnect installed. It's not particularly hard to do. There's going to be a little bit of modification that we're going to need to do to the battery cover to make it all work with this vehicle. But the first thing you need to do is get it mounted up. And really that's just going to be 2 self-tapping screws, and you want it close enough to where the cables can still get to the battery, but this needs to be in a vertical position. The reason being is there's a solenoid inside, and all that does is when it has an electrical pulse, it sends a magnet to open or close, and that becomes the switch for the battery. So having this in a vertical position means that that solenoid can actuate properly. So I use the core support here. I just used the bottom lip to rest those tabs on, and as I drilled those in, it kind of just sandwiched it up there. And then from there, it's pretty easy to get the rest of the connections made. So let's take a look at those. The first one that we'll find, we have a white cable here. This is a ground. So all you need to do is put a ring terminal on and attach it to a factory ground. And there's a few different options of where you want to go. There's a factory ground post that's located on the shock tower. You should have enough cable if you wanted to attach it there. But there's always there's also a series of factory grounds that are located a little bit lower. So if you're doing your base plate at the same time, you'll have really good access to those. So ours is a little bit above the bumper beam inside of the frame. There's a bunch of different factory studs you can use. Now, I will say the ring terminals included in the kit are not going to be a large enough diameter to go on those factory studs, so you may need to source a larger diameter ring terminal to be able to get that mounted up. If you don't have one of those and you still want to get this all installed, you can use the ring terminal that's included with the kit and a self-tapping screw and just drill that into some of the chassis metal to create that ground. Now let's take a look at some of the other connections that we'll need to make. The first one that we'll take a look at is going to be the red cable. It should be labeled battery post, and double check that that's the side that has the fuse holder in place. Now, I do recommend don't put the fuse in place until you have everything hooked up. That way there's no power going through this system. So battery post, I just looped it around by our air box and then attached it to the post on our battery. Now, this is where it gets a little bit different. A lot of newer vehicles are going to this system where this metal tab is just slid over that post, and that distributes the power to the rest of the vehicle. So we need to separate that. And yes, it's going to be a live battery, but what you can do is take off this nut, I believe it to be a 14 millimeter, and just a small flathead screwdriver, just pry on that, making sure you're not grounding that out until you can peel back the metal. And separating that is going to create that disconnect. So our solenoid, basically, when it's open, it's going to allow these to, make one big loop, and everything is going to be just like it would from the factory. But when it's disconnected, this is that separation. So really important to bend this back. And to attach the battery cable, we're going to just use the included, we have star washers and a nut and bolt. I just tightened that down on that opening that was originally on here, and I bent the tab out of the way. And the main reason I bend it back and kind of bent this is so it doesn't make contact with our posts. I'll eventually go back with some electrical tape to create a physical barrier, because if these start to touch each other, we're going to have some arcing going on, and we really don't want that to happen. So I did bend that, and then when it comes to the modifications, we're going to be trimming this cover. Now, to get this off, just a series of snaps here, but they all kind of clip together. I did have to notch out the side, and I notched out the front to make room for our cables. You don't have to put this panel back on, but I always try to make it look as clean as possible. So once I get all my electrical tape wrapped around here, I'll be able to bend this a little bit more to where this should drop on. Our cap is going to go back in place, and it will look nice and clean. So just don't be surprised that you will have to do some trimming. You can use a utility knife if you really want to, a Dremel. I use a multi-tool, and it works really well here. But the main goal is making sure that we get these attached and separated, and that this can go back on. Now, with that being said, this vehicle is a vehicle that you need to disconnect the battery every time, and that's why you're probably looking at a battery disconnect. But if you are doing a portable system or using anything that needs 12-volt power, whether it be an indicator light or whatever it may be for your braking system, just know that you need to run any of that 12-volt power to this post. If you put it on here, once you hit the disconnect, you're not going to have that power. So make sure that, like here we have our 12-volt outlet kit for our Blue Ox Patriot. That's going directly to the post, so it's always going to have that 12-volt power. So that's going to leave us with just one more thing to connect, and that's going to be our gray wire. And this is going to go to the switch inside. That way it can be obviously turned on and off. And the grommet in this vehicle is pretty hard to see from this angle. You're better off to go from the inside and use a pull wire to feed through there, tape that up, and then pull your cable through. The grommet that I used is going to be, if you look underneath your driver footwell, you'll see this kind of gray insulation, and there's a nipple on the grommet. So if you cut that off and take a large diameter screwdriver and poke through, that's going to create a passage for you to be able to run wires through. It may be a little bit tight, so I used an airline tube as kind of a pull wire, but whatever you use, sometimes it's tricky, and you'll be taping these up to pull them through. If you need a little bit of help, you can spray some silicone, and that'll kind of lubricate it through. These are not exactly easy to pull your wires through, but I do also recommend running anything else through at the same time. So you'll see the gray wire pulled through for our battery disconnect. The other ones that I have are for our breakaway switch, for our Blue Ox Patriot, as well as our 12-volt outlet kit that you saw previously tapped into the battery. So getting this run one time sure makes it a lot easier than trying to feed individual wires through. So just take your time here. Now, speaking specifically on our battery disconnect, our gray wire, I just kind of routed this up because I wanted to find a nice clean spot to put our switch. And on this vehicle, I think the best place to do that is there's a fuse panel cover that's located right underneath your light switch. And this is a great way to mount it up on a piece that if you ever wanted to, replace this, it's a lot easier than a whole dashboard. So there's not a whole lot back here to where this is going to become an issue as far as getting installed. And to get this mounted up is actually really easy. So here I'll unplug it first. And this just has a locking ring that goes on this threaded portion. So what you're going to want to do is take a drill bit that's about the same diameter as these threads, drill through the plastic, and then take that locking collar ring and put that in place, and that'll tighten it down. Should have a nice little audible click there. And that leaves us with this plug. So this will just snap in. There's just one way that it can go. And they'll give you the butt connectors to attach this to the wire. So if you have a bunch of extra like I do here, I just kind of spooled that up and tucked it in here. You can cut back as much as you need to. But if you peel back that insulation, you're gonna have a red wire and a black wire. The ring terminals, or the butt connectors they give you are pretty small, but if you strip those back, they're gonna work well with connecting to our switch. So blue to black, yellow to red. Once you get those all in place, just double check to make sure that this will go back into place. If I was to do this all over, it's a little tight on this edge. It still goes back into place and it looks clean, but I could have gone a little bit closer to the center and it would have been a little bit easier as far as getting that all tightened down. So once you have this all in place, you're happy with that, you're going to want to put that fuse in the fuse holder and then test to make sure that it works. Best way to do that is if you hit the accessory mode on your vehicle, you'll probably see the dash light up, and just hit that button and that should cause it to shut off. You'll know pretty quick that the battery is accurately being disconnected. You can also hear the solenoid. So if you still have power, you will want to check your connections and make sure that everything's properly done. So here I have my lights on the on position. Normally it'd start dinging at me. There's nothing. So currently it's disconnected. A quick push of the button and we should be able to get these lights to kick on. I can see my dash is already starting to illuminate a little bit, and you can hear the beeping. So our disconnect's working properly. Now it just comes back to making sure that we tape up any of those connections, and that way we're not going to have metal-to-metal contact, and then trimming that cover. But other than that, that's really the installation. It's very easy to do, and it sure makes it a lot easier than having to open your hood, disconnect the battery every time. You can disconnect your battery from a push of a button from the inside of your vehicle. That's going to do it for a look and installation of the Roadmaster Battery Disconnect on a 2025 Buick Encore GX.